and welcome to Golden Geography. Today we're going to be thinking about Earth's life support systems, which is part of the OCR Geography A-Level specification. We're specifically going to be looking at key question 2, how the water and carbon cycle operate in contrasting locations, and here we're going to be focusing on the tropical rainforest. We're going to be looking at just the theory here. There will be other videos available looking specifically at the Amazon rainforest, but here we're just looking at the key ideas and concepts behind this case study. So let's just start with a little bit about rainforests. They are a beautiful part of our planet. They are wonderfully diverse, and what makes them so important is that diversity, and that is tied into their structure. As you can see here, they have at least 4 key areas. Emergence are those very tallest of trees that pop out the top. Your canopy is your main tree layer. You've got understory beneath that where you get lots of wonderful different plants that live off those trees, including Tarzan's favourite, those old vines he would swing around on. And then beneath that, the shrub layer. All of it really important in providing not just biodiversity, but acting as a key part of our carbon cycle. So we're going to think a little bit about key question 2A and how it is possible to identify physical and human factors that identify the water and carbon cycle within a tropical rainforest. Like I said, we're just looking at the theory here. There's a case study video available as well. So we need to start by thinking a little bit about the water cycle and the flows that take place within the rainforest. Obviously it rains a lot, hence the name, tropical rainforest. And if you look at a map, you will find your rainforest is located on the equator. And because of that, you get a lot of thermal energy that's focused here. That thermal energy means there's high levels of evaporation. That high level of evaporation and lots of thermal energy leads to daily convectional rainfall. So high evaporation in the morning, heavy rainfall in the afternoon. And that's a key part of what's happening here in our rainforest. It means that we get evapotranspiration, so evaporation off the leaves of our canopy and our emergence, but also transpiration, high levels of photosynthesis and transpiration as well. We get lots of precipitation, as I mentioned. It tends to be convectional rainfall, up to 3,000 millimetres a year. We get lots of interception, initially by those emergence, but by our canopy as well. So the actual water that reaches the forest floor is much, much lower. Infiltration and percolation happens through the soils, and that is aided by stem flow particularly. In undisturbed forests, we get relatively low levels of surface runoff because the water is used. It's absorbed into the soil moisture and then is used by the plants, by the biomass. So we don't tend to get that much surface runoff under natural conditions. We do have some interesting stores. When we look at our rainforests, of course, we get lots of water stored in the biomass itself, in the leaves, in the roots, in the trunks of the trees. But as you can see in this picture, we get a lot of very low-lying, it looks like cloud, but actually it's moisture that has come from evapotranspiration, and it can move and flow a little bit like clouds. Most evident at the beginning and end of days, but we do get a lot of atmospheric moisture. There is soil moisture too, and in some rainforest areas you will have very distinctive aquifers or rivers, but that depends a little bit on your location in your case study. So stores are really important for our water cycle. Our carbon cycle is really key too. If we think about our rainforest, well, it is known for the biomass. It photosynthesizes. Huge levels of photosynthesis is taking place. And similarly, respiration. We get lots of respiration, releasing carbon. So absolutely it's a key store, photosynthesizing and locking up carbon, but it also respires carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Because of the temperature and the moisture, decomposition happens at a fast rate. So a lot of CO2 released quite quickly through the process of decomposition. And unfortunately, there's quite high levels of human activity causing combustion in these areas. So a lot of flows of carbon. If you think about the stores, absolutely the biomass is key, but we also have soil stores of carbon, and actually quite a significant amount of carbon in the atmosphere, and that is needed to fuel the photosynthesis and the production of NPP in this region. We can see here a little diagram, and that's really important to demonstrate the fact that absolutely a traditional standing forest will absorb more carbon than it will emit. You chop it down, you end up with degraded land that you'll get decomposition and CO2 is removed. If you start to reforest, you will find that some CO2 is absorbed, but not as much as previously. So we've got to think a little bit about how we manage our carbon levels and how we manage our forestry reserves. More of that later. We need to think a little bit about how our forests work, both on an individual scale, so looking at a tree, thinking about both rainfall, interception, stem flow, soil moisture, soil water uptake, and things like evapotranspiration, but also the use of carbon, so the carbon being taken in from the atmosphere into the plants, but also uptake of carbon through those roots being used for photosynthesis, and how it can then be released through things like decomposition. So individual tree level, but also on a much bigger scale. If we think about forests holistically and the role of the emergence and the main canopy, and how they will intercept water and really reduce the levels of water reaching the soil, but also how they are constantly all year round photosynthesizing and getting carbon out of the atmosphere. So what happens on a small scale with one tree, you can scale up and look at a forest as a whole and see those processes intertwining and working in quite complex ways. Some of the physical things we need to think about when thinking about rainforests, very much the temperature. We have got very high temperatures, consistent temperatures. There is a little bit of seasonality, but very, very little variation compared to other parts of the planet. Well, what does that do for the flows of the water cycle? Well, those high temperatures means we've got high levels of evaporation. It means we've got high levels of transpiration from our plant life, and that happens all year round. We've got things like snow melt and glacier melt in colder regions, and we'll touch on that with our tundra later, so we need to bear that in mind. We do get a little bit of variation there, but you don't tend to get these in and around your rainforest zones. We need to think a little bit about condensation and precipitation. That warm air will hold more moisture than cold areas, so you get cloud formation, a bit like we saw earlier. That means those warm temperatures that we get where we have our rainforests, that we have atmospheric stores of water. We do get some soil moisture, but that soil can dry out, particularly if it's exposed. If you've had deforestation, that water can be exposed and can run out quite quickly. And surface water may evaporate quite quickly too. If we think a little bit about the rocks, the geology, it's really important, some of the key features that they have. So particularly how permeable, or the porosity of the rocks. And it influences the water cycle, particularly the infiltration rates, how the water percolates through the rocks, whether you get overland flow or not. It will influence the storage, we get groundwater storage, and even surface water. Some rainforests experience flooding. So that will be influenced by the rate of infiltration, which is influenced by rock permeability. So it's worth finding out a little bit about the geology of your case study and how the types of rock might influence some of the key processes and flows. We've also got topography. Again, your case study will depend on your topography a little bit. If you're looking at a rainforest that has a drainage basin with areas of high relief, those areas of high relief may fill the zone, fill your drainage basin with water on a regular basis, but you may not have that. It may vary, and that will influence things like surface runoff and infiltration. It may influence soil moisture as well. So it's worth finding out a little bit about the topography and how that ties in with the geology too. We're going to think about the carbon cycle here. Temperature will affect your carbon cycle. The rates of photosynthesis will vary depending on your temperatures. So if you're thinking about the rainforest, those warm and actually wet conditions are perfect for photosynthesis. Plants love it. You will find respiration happens at quite high levels here too, and decomposition. When you look at permafrost in our tundra areas, again, this is not for our rainforest, but we'll touch on this just so we're aware, a little comparison here. When we look at permafrost in tundra regions, those colder conditions will experience a little bit of meltwater, and that will change the carbon cycle there. Okay, so just a little warning note, permafrost does not occur in rainforest, but we're just thinking about it for a minute as a comparison note to the rainforest. If you think about soil carbon, the stores we get there, and our atmospheric stores of carbon, they will be influenced by those warm temperatures that we get in a rainforest as well. So those warmer conditions means soil carbon will be used more regularly by the biomass. Atmospheric carbon, again, used very regularly for photosynthesis. If you think about those plants, photosynthesis and respiration will happen really quickly. Litter fall will happen on a regular basis, and those leaves will be decomposed quite quickly. In terms of stores, the biomass will store carbon for a very long time, but it'll also break it down quite quickly. So when those ancient rainforest trees fall, they will decompose because of those warm, wet conditions. And that organic matter will be really important in helping to enrich the soils. Naturally, rainforests don't tend to have very rich or deep soils. The biomass, the organic matter, as it decomposes, helps add to the soils, to build up the organic matter of the soils that can then be reused as part of that carbon cycle. Those soils are an important store, but it's very short residency within those soils. There are other factors too. We do need to think a little bit about the geology. Again, if we're thinking about the carbon cycle, we might find that there are specific types of geology that have high levels of carbon in it, or we might find that the types of geology will influence the infiltration rate of the water cycle, but may also have an impact on the ability of the carbon to be stored and or used within the soils, because geology influences soil formation. So if you've got a geology that is impermeable, you might find that you've got quite high levels of surface runoff, and you'll find that you get a lot of leaching, and you'll find you've got lots of erosion, and you might find that that will affect your carbon cycle because your carbon is taken with your water. And you might find that it affects your groundwater and your carbon because you can't find it moving through that. Having a little look here at the water cycle, it is affected by natural things. So seasonality. There's not a huge seasonality in tropical areas, but there is some, particularly if you're looking at being between your tropics rather than directly on your equator. You will find that you will get some seasonality associated with the intertropical convergence zone and the wet seasons that will bring. You might get some extreme weather events, particularly as climate change starts to take hold and impact some of these areas. And they will influence vegetation, the amount of vegetation, the amount of growth that they will have on a yearly basis, and that could influence some of the animal activity you have and how they interact with the water cycle in your rainforest. You may find you get some human interaction too. Deforestation and farming are some of the main human activities or anthropogenic activities, and deforestation happens for lots of reasons, but it also happens to lead on to farming. So that will change some of the flows and the stores and the functionality you find in your rainforest. That human activity will also have an impact on your carbon. So obviously if you cut down your carbon stores, your trees, then you will reduce that store. You will change the rate of photosynthesis, you will reduce it, and you will have impacts as well that impact your farming. So if you take away a tree, replace it with grass, the rate of photosynthesis is going to be very different between the two. For this in the previous slide, do feel free to just pause and have a little look at the tables. Here we've got a little diagram. Feel free to zoom in. On the left we've got the natural processes that should happen within a rainforest area, and on the right you've got the effects of human activity and how particularly that's impacting the water cycle. This will show you a little bit about how it affects carbon stores. So on the left you've got an established rainforest. On the right you've got an area that's had years and years of deforestation, and the rates of the carbon absorption, particularly the little green squares, vary greatly. So again, pause, have a little look at this diagram, see how that human activity is impacting this rainforest environment. And finding ways to manage it. This will vary greatly depending on your case study. Afforestation obviously is a key way to try and change it, but you've got to make sure you plant a variety of species, not just one species. You want to develop those 4 layers, not just your main canopy. You've got agroforestry, you've got terracing, ploughing that you can use, no-till farming, lots of these, but have a look not just at their impacts here for your water and carbon cycle, but think about which ones are specific to your case study. And there's benefits here in the green box. See if you can think of some disadvantages. For example, planting a tree, great. How long does it take for that tree to grow and become mature and effective? Okay, thanks for listening. Pause the video, use the red, amber, green to mark off these different parts of your study. So green you get it, amber not sure, red I really need to go back and have another look. Thank you, bye.